The Medici family. Just the name itself whispers secrets of power, betrayal, and unbelievable wealth. For centuries, they didn't just rule Florence, they practically sculpted its destiny, and in doing so, shaped the very course of European history. Forget your TikTok influencers, the Medici were the original power brokers, kings and queens makers, and the masters of the game. They clawed their way from humble bankers to grand dukes, even putting two of their own on the papal throne. How did they do it? Not by brute force alone, but with a cunning so sharp, it could cut through any opposition. They played a long game, a dangerous game, where every smile hit a calculation and every alliance was a temporary advantage. Get ready to dive into the truly wild, jaw-dropping maneuvers that cemented the Medici as one of history's most powerful and sly dynasties. These aren't just stories. They are blueprints for how to dominate, manipulate, and outwit everyone around you, all while making it look like destiny. You won't believe some of the moves they pulled off. Number 1, Grand Duke Ferdinand I's strategic shift to France. The year is 1587. A shadow of uncertainty hangs over Florence and over the Medici family. Ferdinand I, who was once a cardinal of the church, unexpectedly finds himself the Grand Duke of Tuscany. His older brother, Francesco I, had met a mysterious end, and suddenly the weight of a powerful state falls onto Ferdinand's shoulders. The landscape of Europe is dominated by one colossal power, Habsburg Spain. Spain's influence stretches across vast territories, including much of Italy, with Spanish troops garrisoned in strategic locations like Prato, very near Florence, and throughout the rich lands of Naples. For generations, Florentine foreign policy had been tightly interwoven with Spanish interests. It was a practical alliance offering security for trade and a powerful protector against other Italian states or French incursions. However, this arrangement came at a steep price, a subtle but undeniable subservience to Spanish goals, often at the expense of true Tuscan independence. Ferdinand I, though, was not content with merely existing in Spain's shadow. He harbored ambitions for Tuscany to stand on its own, to be a respected player on the grand European stage, not merely a Spanish satellite. He understood that true power lay not in absolute allegiance, but in carefully balanced independence. Ferdinand's cunning began with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in approach. He knew he could not openly defy Spain. Such a move would invite catastrophic military retaliation and economic ruin. Instead, he started to subtly loosen the bonds that tied Tuscany so firmly to Madrid. His goal was to achieve greater autonomy, to create a foreign policy that served Tuscan interests first, even if it meant a delicate dance between the major powers. He began by cultivating relationships with other European courts, sending out feelers, and exploring possibilities beyond the Spanish orbit. This wasn't about outright rebellion, it was about diversifying Tuscany's diplomatic portfolio. He aimed to make Tuscany too valuable an ally for any single power to entirely dominate, and too interconnected for any one power to easily dismiss. The centerpiece of Ferdinand's grand strategy was a bold and audacious marriage alliance. He turned his gaze towards France, a traditional rival of Spain, but a nation that, under its new unifying King Henri IV, was rapidly reasserting itself as a major European force. And Ferdinand's niece, Marie de' Medici, was the daughter of the recently deceased Grand Duke Francesco I. While she was a Medici, she was not yet a queen. Ferdinand saw in her an invaluable pawn in his game of high-stakes diplomacy. He began to subtly promote Marie as a suitable bride for Henri IV. This was a challenging task. Henri IV was a Protestant who had famously converted to Catholicism to secure his throne, famously declaring, "Paris is worth a mass." He was a king who commanded respect and was rebuilding his nation. For him to marry Marie de' Medici, a distant cousin from a family of bankers turned dukes, rather than a princess from a more established royal house, would require immense diplomatic skill and substantial incentives. Ferdinand I brought all of his considerable financial acumen and political charm to bear. He presented Marie not just as a beautiful young woman, but as a gateway to the immense wealth of the Medici family and the burgeoning power of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. He offered an enormous dowry, a truly staggering sum that would provide much-needed funds for Henri IV's still recovering French treasury. The marriage was not just about the money, it was about the prestige of aligning with a rising Italian power, one with deep connections across the peninsula and access to vast intellectual and artistic resources. The negotiations were meticulous, conducted with the utmost secrecy and precision. Ferdinand understood that the optics of the alliance were as important as its substance. In 1600, the culmination of Ferdinand's efforts arrived. Marie de' Medici married King Henri IV of France. It was a truly monumental event. This marriage established a direct, powerful alliance between Tuscany and France, effectively creating a counterweight to the previously unchallenged Spanish dominance in Italy. It sent a clear message across Europe. Tuscany was no longer a mere appendage of Spain. It was an independent state capable of forging its own alliances with the greatest powers on the continent. The wedding was a lavish affair designed to showcase Medici wealth and power, and Marie's arrival in France was greeted with royal fanfare. Ferdinand I did not stop there. He also pursued an active and independent foreign policy in the Mediterranean. He invested heavily in expanding the Tuscan navy, transforming it into a respectable force capable of defending Tuscan merchant ships, and even engaging in privateering against Ottoman and Barbary corsairs. He heavily promoted and developed the port of Livorno, transforming it into a free port that welcomed merchants of all nations and faiths. This policy boosted Tuscan trade and solidified its maritime presence, further reducing its reliance on Spanish naval protection. He even dispatched a Tuscan expedition to North Africa, demonstrating Tuscany's willingness to project its power beyond its borders. These actions, while sometimes risky, subtly asserted Tuscany's sovereignty and its capacity for independent action. Throughout this process, Ferdinand I masterfully avoided overtly provoking Spain. He continued to pay homage to the emperor where it was politically necessary, maintaining formal diplomatic ties and participating in the usual ceremonies. He never gave Spain an excuse for direct intervention. He understood the delicate balance of power and the limits of his own strength. His shift towards France was a gradual, calculated pivot, not a sudden, aggressive break. He demonstrated that a smaller state could achieve significant autonomy by leveraging its resources, its diplomatic skills, and its strategic location, without inviting overwhelming retaliation from a dominant power. The immediate outcome of Ferdinand's strategic maneuvers was nothing short of transformative. The marriage of Marie de' Medici to Henri IV cemented a powerful Franco-Tuscan axis. Tuscany gained significantly greater autonomy and saw its prestige soar on the European stage. The Medici family's influence was no longer confined to Florence and the papacy. It now extended directly into the heart of one of Europe's most powerful royal courts. Marie de' Medici would later become Queen Regent of France, ruling on behalf of her young son, Louis XIII. This incredible ascent further cemented Medici influence at the highest levels of European power, ensuring the long-term stability and continued prominence of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany for centuries to come. Ferdinand I had, through shrewd diplomacy and a daring vision, secured his family's place among the sovereign houses of Europe. Number 2, the marriage of Catherine de' Medici to the French Dauphin. The papal court of Clement VII in the 1530s was a place of immense political pressure and shifting alliances. Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici, was a cousin of Pope Leo X and the illegitimate son of Giuliano de' Medici. He had survived the catastrophic sack of Rome just a few years earlier, a humiliation that had stripped him of much of his immediate power and trapped him as a prisoner. Yet, against all odds, he had not only survived but had managed to negotiate his way back into a position of influence, even if a precarious one. Now, with the Medici family restored to power in Florence, thanks in large part to Clement VII's negotiations with Emperor Charles V. The Pope faced a new challenge. He needed to secure the Medici family's long-term influence and elevate their status on the treacherous European stage. The family had made their fortune as bankers, then risen to rule Florence, and even held the papacy itself. But they were not yet a truly royal house, marrying into the great ruling dynasties of Europe without question. This was the ultimate ambition. Enter Catherine de' Medici. She was an orphan, a young woman born of one of the main branches of the Medici family, daughter of Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino. Despite her noble lineage, she was technically a minor Medici, lacking a kingdom of her own or a strong claim to one. She was a valuable asset, but also, in some ways, a burden, a girl whose future needed to be secured through a strategic match. Many might have seen her as merely a pawn in a game of power, a niece to be married off for a decent sum. But Clement VII, with his keen understanding of European politics and the subtle mechanics of influence, saw her differently. He saw Catherine not as a problem to be solved, but as an extraordinary opportunity. He envisioned a grand alliance that would not only elevate Catherine herself, but more importantly would catapult the Medici name to true royal status, intertwining their bloodline with one of the most powerful reigning families in Europe. Clement VII's cunning lay in his audacity and his masterful use of his unique position. In 1533, only a few years after the traumatic sack of Rome, he was still navigating a complex political landscape. He had recently forged a crucial alliance with Emperor Charles V, which had allowed him to restore Medici power in Florence. Now, he intended to leverage this newfound stability and his spiritual authority as Pope to achieve an even grander ambition. He began to discreetly promote Catherine as a suitable bride for Henri, the second son of King Francis I of France. This was an incredibly bold move. Henri was not yet the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne, but he was a prince of the blood, a son of one of Europe's most formidable monarchs. For a non-royal princess like Catherine to marry into such a family was almost unheard of. To sweeten the deal, Clement VII went beyond mere diplomacy. He offered an enormous dowry, a truly staggering sum of 100,000 crowns. This wasn't just money, it was a testament to the vast wealth of the Medici family and the Pope's determination to make this match happen. The dowry was a major draw for the French treasury, which was always in need of funds to finance its endless wars and lavish court. But Clement VII did not stop there. He took the extraordinary step of traveling to Marseille, a French port city, to personally officiate the wedding between Catherine and Henri. This act in itself was a powerful statement. The Pope, the spiritual leader of Christendom, was personally endorsing this union, bestowing upon it an immense religious and political legitimacy. His presence at the ceremony demonstrated the profound importance that the papacy, and by extension the Medici, placed on this alliance. The marriage ceremony itself was a grand spectacle, designed to impress and solidify the bond between the French monarchy and the Medici-led papacy. Clement VII performed the rites with solemnity and grandeur, surrounded by cardinals, French nobility, and dignitaries from across Europe. He knew that such a public display of unity would send a clear message to all observers about the newfound strength of this alliance and the rising status of the Medici. Then an unexpected and truly momentous turn of events occurred. In 1536, only 3 years after the marriage, Henri's elder brother, Francis, the Dauphin of France, suddenly died. This unforeseen tragedy immediately elevated Henri, and by extension Catherine, to an entirely new status. Henri became the new Dauphin, the direct heir to the French throne. This meant that Catherine, the Medici orphan who had been married off to a second son, was now the future Queen of France. It was a stroke of incredible luck, a twist of fate that Clement VII could never have entirely planned, but one that his initial cunning had made possible. His audacious gamble had paid off beyond his wildest dreams. The immediate outcome of this remarkable maneuver was truly transformative for the Medici. Catherine de' Medici, through her marriage, became the Queen of France. This elevated the Medici family to an unprecedented level of royal legitimacy. They were no longer merely powerful bankers or influential rulers of an Italian state. They were now intertwined with one of the greatest royal dynasties in Europe. This marriage provided immense prestige and influence for the Medici, granting them access to the highest echelons of power and forever changing their status. It cemented their position as a true European dynasty, capable of intermarrying with the most powerful ruling houses on the continent and influencing the very course of European affairs for generations to come. Number 3. Pope Clement VII's survival and return after the sack of Rome. The early 16th century in Italy was a tumultuous period, a brutal arena for the power struggles between Europe's giants. At the heart of this chaos were two formidable monarchs, Emperor Charles V, ruler of the vast Habsburg Empire, and King Francis I of France, head of a powerful and ambitious kingdom. Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici, found himself caught squarely in the middle of their endless rivalry. His cunning, or perhaps his fatal flaw, was his attempt to maintain a delicate balance of power by constantly shifting alliances between the two. One moment he would lean towards France, the next towards the emperor, hoping to keep both in check and preserve the papal state's independence. However, this policy of calculated ambiguity backfired spectacularly. His most recent shift, an alliance with France against Charles V, enraged the emperor. Charles V was a man of immense power, and his armies were formidable. Unpaid and mutinous imperial troops, a mix of Germans and Spaniards, began to march south through Italy. Their target was Rome, the very heart of Christendom. On May 6, 1527, the unthinkable happened. These unruly imperial forces, starved for plunder and unleashed from their commander's control, stormed and sacked Rome with unparalleled brutality. It was an event that shocked all of Europe. The Holy City was subjected to a reign of terror with widespread looting, burning, desecration, and killing. Churches were defiled, convents were raided, and priceless works of art were destroyed. Pope Clement VII, caught completely off guard, was trapped in the Castel Sant'Angelo, the ancient fortress that served as a papal refuge. He watched in horror as his city burned and his people suffered. Clement VII's cunning in this dire situation began with his sheer will to survive and his incredible endurance. Besieged in Castel Sant'Angelo for months, he faced starvation, fear, and the constant threat of being overwhelmed. He held out, enduring the immense humiliation of being a prisoner in his own fortress while his city was ravaged. He was eventually forced to surrender, agreeing to a massive ransom and humiliating terms that effectively made him a prisoner of the emperor. He was forced to pay an astronomical sum, hand over strategic territories, and promise future allegiance. His personal escape from Rome was a desperate clandestine act. In December 1527, he slipped out of the city disguised as a gardener, an utterly undignified exit for the Supreme Pontiff. Despite this unimaginable catastrophe and personal humiliation, Clement VII displayed a remarkable degree of diplomatic resilience. He recognized Charles V's overwhelming power and the futility of continued defiance. Instead of clinging to his previous alliances or plotting revenge, he performed an astonishing political pivot. He began to shrewdly negotiate a reconciliation with the very emperor whose troops had sacked his city and held him captive. This was not a surrender of principle, but a ruthless calculation of survival and a masterful exercise in realpolitik. He understood that to regain any semblance of power, he had to align himself with the strongest player on the board. The fruits of this strategic realignment were cemented in the Treaty of Barcelona in 1529. In a stunning display of pragmatism, Clement VII agreed to crown Charles V Holy Roman Emperor. This was a crucial act. It legitimized Charles V's imperial claim, bestowing upon him the ultimate symbolic authority from the spiritual head of Christendom. In return for this immensely valuable concession, Charles V agreed to restore the Medici to power in Florence. The Florentines, seizing the opportunity presented by the sack of Rome, had expelled the Medici once again and re-established their beloved republic. The emperor, at the Pope's behest, would now be the instrument of their family's return. To further solidify this new fragile alliance, Clement VII employed another classic Medici maneuver, a strategic marriage. He arranged the marriage of his niece, Catherine de' Medici, to Charles V's nephew, Henri, the future King Henri II of France. This was a remarkable diplomatic feat. It effectively reconciled the papacy with two of the most powerful dynasties in Europe, the Habsburgs and the Valois, both of whom were still rivals, but now had a shared interest in maintaining stability with the papacy. It was a clear signal to all of Europe that Clement VII was back in the game and forging new, powerful connections. The final piece of Clement VII's intricate puzzle involved the fate of Florence. With the emperor's backing, imperial troops, funded by Clement VII, laid siege to Florence. The city, proud and defiant in its republicanism, resisted fiercely for nearly a year. But against the might of the imperial army, Florence eventually fell in August 1530. The Medici, in the person of Alessandro de' Medici, an illegitimate son of Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino, or even Clement VII himself, were restored as hereditary dukes under imperial protection. The Florentine Republic, which had flickered into existence several times, was extinguished once and for all. The immediate outcome of Clement VII's incredible cunning was astonishing. Against all odds, he not only survived the most devastating event in papal history in centuries, but he managed to regain his spiritual and political authority. He solidified his relationship with the most powerful ruler in Europe, the Emperor Charles V, and crucially for his family, he restored the Medici to absolute power in Florence, ending the Republican dream that had plagued their rule for decades. Clement VII's personal ordeal became a testament to his extraordinary resilience and his ruthless political acumen, showcasing his ability to turn utter defeat into a strategic triumph. Number 4. Pope Leo X Giovanni de' Medici's election to the papacy. The year is 1513. The formidable and often warring Pope Julius II, known as the Warrior Pope, has died, leaving a turbulent legacy. The College of Cardinals convenes in Rome to elect his successor. This is not just a spiritual event, it is a momentous political contest shaping the fate of Christendom and the balance of power across Europe. Among the assembled cardinals is Giovanni de' Medici, the second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent. At 37 years old, he is relatively young for such a powerful position, and he is known to be suffering from a recurring fistula, a painful and potentially debilitating illness. This personal detail, far from being a weakness, would become a key element in his cunning strategy for ascending to the papal throne. Giovanni's cunning began with a masterstroke of perception management. Despite his immense wealth and powerful connections, he deliberately projected an image of being somewhat weak and perhaps even short-lived due to his ongoing health issues. He subtly leveraged his perceived infirmity, presenting himself to the other cardinals as a non-threatening temporary choice. The older, more established cardinals, many of whom harbored ambitions for the papacy themselves, might have viewed a strong, healthy candidate as a direct threat. But Giovanni, with his air of gentle suffering and his seemingly limited lifespan, appeared to be a less formidable rival. This disarmed many cardinals who might otherwise have staunchly opposed a vigorous and ambitious Medici on the papal throne. He appeared to be a safe transitional choice who would not live long enough to solidify absolute power or create long-lasting political shifts. Beneath this carefully constructed facade of frailty, Giovanni deployed the vast financial resources of the Medici family with ruthless efficiency. The Medici banks, then among the wealthiest and most influential in Europe, became his primary weapon. He initiated a massive campaign of bribery and inducements. He distributed enormous sums of money to various cardinals, lavishing gifts upon them and making tempting promises of lucrative positions, benefices, and bishoprics once he became pope. He literally bought votes. The Medici network of financial influence built over generations was unparalleled. Cardinals who were indebted to the Medici Bank, or who simply saw an opportunity for personal gain, found themselves swayed by Giovanni's generous offers. This was not a subtle operation, it was a brazen, calculated financial assault on the College of Cardinals. Giovanni also masterfully played different factions within the college against each other. The cardinals were a diverse group, divided by nationality, loyalty, and political ambition. Some desired a return to peace and stability after Julius II's wars, while others sought to continue an aggressive foreign policy. Giovanni presented himself as a compromise candidate, someone who could bridge these divides. He subtly promised reforms to some, hinting at greater collegiality and less autocratic rule, while reassuring others that existing policies and structures would not be dramatically overturned. He carefully cultivated key older cardinals who held significant sway, ensuring their quiet support, or at least their neutrality. He was a chameleon, adapting his promises to suit the specific desires and fears of each cardinal he approached. He portrayed himself as a unifier, a man of peace, eager to restore calm and harmony to the church after the militant reign of his predecessor. Giovanni de' Medici was known for his love of luxury, his deep appreciation for art, and his charming diplomatic nature. He was a Renaissance prince in every sense. He used these personal qualities to great effect. He hosted lavish dinners, engaged in learned conversations, and charmed those around him with his wit and sophistication. He projected an image of a cultured, amiable individual, someone who would bring dignity and intellectual brilliance to the papacy rather than the military aggression of Julius II. This cultivated image further smoothed his path, making him a personally agreeable choice even to those who might have reservations about the Medici family's growing power. The culmination of Giovanni de' Medici's cunning strategy arrived on March 11, 1513. After relatively short deliberations within the conclave, Giovanni de' Medici was unanimously elected pope. He took the name Leo X, a name that would become synonymous with lavish patronage of the arts, massive spending, and the onset of the Protestant Reformation. His election was a crowning achievement for the Medici family, bringing them to the absolute pinnacle of European power. They were no longer just the unofficial rulers of Florence or powerful bankers. They were now spiritual and political leaders of Christendom, holding immense sway over the hearts and minds of millions across Europe. Leo X immediately set about using his new position to further enrich his family, securing lucrative positions and privileges for his relatives, demonstrating that the Medici spirit of ambition and financial acumen remained as strong as ever. Number 5. Cosimo, the first de' Medici's use of the Florentine Academy as a tool for control. Cosimo, the first de' Medici, had already brutally consolidated his power in Florence, crushing any Republican opposition and securing his position as duke. But mere military and political control, he understood, was not enough. To truly legitimize his absolute rule and ensure its longevity, he needed to control not just the bodies of his subjects, but their minds, their ideas, and their cultural expressions. He aimed to reshape the very intellectual and artistic landscape of Tuscany to serve his dynastic ambitions. The context of Florence in the mid-16th century was crucial. It was a city renowned for its intellectual vibrancy, a cradle of the Renaissance. This very intellectual richness, however, could be a double-edged sword. Independent thought, especially Republican sentiment, could pose a persistent threat to Cosimo's authoritarian regime. The city's scholars, poets, and artists, if not carefully managed, could become sources of dissent, or worse, vehicles for anti-Medici propaganda. Cosimo saw this potential danger and decided to transform it into a powerful tool for his own ends. Cosimo's cunning began with the founding of the Accademia Fiorentina in 1540. Ostensibly, the purpose of this grand institution was noble: to promote the Tuscan language, to preserve its purity, and to foster the literary and artistic genius for which Florence was justly famous. However, the true, unspoken purpose of the Academy was far more insidious. It became a powerful state-controlled instrument for shaping and dominating intellectual discourse in Tuscany. This was not a private club for scholars, it was an arm of the state. Cosimo meticulously controlled the Academy's membership. He ensured that its most prominent scholars, poets, and artists were loyal to him, personally and politically. These members, men of letters and influence, were then tasked with a crucial, unspoken mission to promote Cosimo's image as a wise, just, and absolute ruler. They drew flattering parallels between Cosimo and the great Roman emperors, subtly suggesting that his rule was a natural, almost divine progression for Florence. The art and literature created under the Academy's patronage were subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, directed to glorify the Medici. Giorgio Vasari, a key figure in the Academy and Cosimo's court painter, became the most famous chronicler of Medici achievements, carefully curating their history to present them in the best possible light. The Medici were depicted as enlightened patrons, heirs to the classical tradition, and the rightful rulers of Tuscany. Through the Academy, Cosimo established a form of cultural censorship and ideological control. The Academy dictated artistic and literary taste, ensuring that only works aligning with Cosimo's vision received patronage, promotion, and public acclaim. Critical or Republican-leaning thought, subtle criticisms of absolute rule, or any expressions that might challenge Medici authority were marginalized, ignored, or actively suppressed. The Academy effectively co-opted the intellectual elite of Florence, transforming potential critics or independent thinkers into agents of state propaganda. Those scholars who might have once debated Republican ideals now wrote odes to Cosimo's wisdom. Artists who might have painted civic allegories now depicted the Duke's military triumphs or his family's piety. This extensive cultural patronage also served a broader purpose. It created a powerful public image. By investing in grand architectural projects, magnificent artworks, and scholarly institutions, Cosimo cultivated the image of an enlightened Renaissance prince. This carefully crafted facade of cultural benevolence diverted public attention from his authoritarian methods and the systematic suppression of political freedom. It provided a veneer of intellectual respectability and aesthetic grandeur to his absolute power, convincing many that Medici rule was not only necessary but also beneficial and historically ordained. The Florentine Academy, therefore, became a crucial part of Cosimo's broader strategy to legitimize and secure his dynastic rule. The immediate outcome was highly effective. The Florentine Academy became a cornerstone of Cosimo's regime, successfully reshaped the intellectual and cultural landscape of Tuscany, aligning it with Medici propaganda and dynastic goals. Cosimo solidified his image as a Renaissance prince, a patron of the arts and sciences, and a wise ruler, further entrenching his absolute rule and securing his family's legacy. Through subtle cultural manipulation and strategic patronage, he controlled not just the institutions of government, but the very ideas and narratives that shaped Florentine society. Number 6, Cosimo, the first of Medici's consolidation of power and creation of the Grand Duchy. The mid-16th century in Florence was a period of profound instability. The Medici had been expelled twice, first in 1494 and again in 1527, only to be forcibly returned. In 1537, a shocking event plunged the city into fresh uncertainty. Duke Alessandro de' Medici, the first Duke of Florence, was assassinated. With Alessandro gone, the powerful Republican factions, known as the Fuoriusciti or exiles, saw a golden opportunity to finally restore the Florentine Republic and dismantle Medici rule forever. Amidst this chaos, a young, seemingly insignificant Medici heir emerged. Cosimo, from a minor, less prominent branch of the family, was chosen as the new duke. Many believed he would be easily controllable, a puppet figure that various powerful factions could manipulate. They were gravely mistaken. Cosimo I inherited a state in profound turmoil. Florence was weak, financially strained, and surrounded by powerful, often hostile neighbors eager to exploit its instability. Internal Republican opposition, though defeated at times, was always lurking, ready to rise again. Cosimo's cunning began with an immediate and decisive assertion of his authority. He understood that legitimacy must first be forged in the crucible of military might. He moved swiftly to crush the lingering Republican forces that had massed against him. At the Battle of Montemerlo, in August 1537, Cosimo's forces decisively defeated the exiled Republicans. He showed no mercy. Their leaders were captured and executed, sending a stark and undeniable message republicanism was dead in Florence, and any attempt to revive it would be met with swift and brutal force. This act alone sent a chilling warning to all who might oppose him. Having dealt with internal threats, Cosimo turned his attention to securing external protection. He understood that Florence, even under his strong hand, was vulnerable to the larger European powers, especially the Holy Roman Empire. He embarked on a shrewd diplomatic campaign to cultivate Emperor Charles V, arguably the most powerful ruler in Europe at the time. Charles V had troops stationed throughout Italy and commanded immense influence. Cosimo paid Charles V substantial sums of money, a continuous flow of funds that secured military aid and, crucially, imperial recognition of his rule. He solidified this alliance by marrying Eleanor of Toledo, daughter of the Viceroy of Naples, Don Pedro Alvarez de Toledo, a key imperial ally and one of Charles V's most trusted administrators. This marriage not only brought a large dowry, but, more importantly, provided an ironclad guarantee of imperial protection and legitimacy against both internal rebellions and external threats from rival Italian states or France. Cosimo then set about transforming the very structure of Florentine government. He recognized that the old Republican institutions, even in name, were potential breeding grounds for dissent. He established a strong, centralized bureaucracy, replacing the elected officials of the old Republic with his own loyal appointees. He created a sophisticated spy network and a chillingly effective secret police force, the Auto di Guardia e Balia 8 of Guard and Justice, to monitor dissent and suppress any opposition before it could even form. This was a true police state where every whisper could be reported and every potential enemy neutralized. He systematically dismantled the traditional Florentine civic bodies, consolidating all power into his own hands and those of his carefully selected loyalists. But Cosimo's ambition stretched beyond merely ruling Florence. He sought to elevate his status and that of his family on the European stage. He systematically expanded Florentine territory, engaging in a long and costly war to acquire Siena, a historic rival. With imperial support, Florence eventually conquered Siena in 1555, vastly increasing the territory and resources under Medici control. Having consolidated Florence and expanded his territorial dominion, Cosimo then embarked on a relentless campaign to lobby the Pope and the Emperor for a higher, more prestigious title. He argued that his control over a unified Tuscany, encompassing Florence, Siena, and other territories, warranted a greater recognition than a mere dukedom. 1569, after years of persistent diplomacy and the skillful use of both financial and political leverage, Pope Pius V elevated the Duchy of Florence into the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. The immediate outcome of Cosimo I's relentless cunning was profound and permanent. He transformed Florence from a republic, however nominal, into an absolute hereditary monarchy. The Medici became Grand Dukes, a title that elevated them above other Italian dukes and solidified their sovereign rule for over 2 centuries. Tuscany became a recognized, stable, and increasingly powerful state in Italy, a testament to Cosimo's ruthless efficiency and his unyielding ambition. He had taken a vulnerable, unstable state and, through a combination of military force, shrewd diplomacy, and systematic political control, forged a lasting dynasty that would shape the region for generations. Number 7. Lorenzo the Magnificent's solo trip to Naples. The year is 1479. Florence is in a desperate situation. The war instigated by Pope Sixtus IV, a direct consequence of the brutal Pazzi conspiracy, is going terribly. Florence's traditional allies are wavering, some even abandoning the struggling republic. The Florentine economy, always the lifeblood of the city, is strained to breaking point by the costs of war. Militarily, Florence is vulnerable, facing a formidable coalition led by the Pope, who has allied himself with King Ferrante of Naples and the fearsome Duke Federico da Montefeltro of Urbino. It seems as though Florence is cornered, isolated, and facing imminent defeat. Lorenzo the Magnificent, the true leader of Florence, understands that a conventional military or diplomatic solution is unlikely to succeed. He needs to break the alliance that threatens to destroy his city and his family's power. The setup for Lorenzo's cunning maneuver was one of utter desperation. Florence was isolated. The city faced financial ruin and military conquest. Lorenzo needed to act decisively, but conventional means had failed. He understood that a dramatic, unconventional move was necessary to disrupt the established order and seize the initiative. He also knew that only a personal appeal, one that bypassed traditional diplomatic channels and directly engaged with his most dangerous adversary, could possibly succeed. Lorenzo's cunning began with an act of truly audacious personal diplomacy. In December 1479, he made a shocking, unannounced decision. He would sail to Naples, the very heart of enemy territory. This was not a diplomatic mission with a large entourage and safe passage guaranteed. This was a solitary journey into the lion's den, a move that stunned all of Italy. He left Florence, entrusting the city to his closest supporters, knowing full well that he might be imprisoned, assassinated, or held for ransom. The risk was immense, the stakes impossibly high. But this bold, almost reckless move immediately captured the imagination of Italy and created an unprecedented buzz. It was a statement of courage, desperation, and supreme confidence. Once in Naples, Lorenzo faced King Ferrante, a ruler notorious for his treachery, cruelty, and willingness to betray allies. Lorenzo, despite the immense danger, appealed directly to Ferrante's self-interest and his desire for stability in Italy. He argued that a strong, independent Florence, far from being a threat, was a necessary counterbalance to the ever-growing power of the Papal States and the expansionist ambitions of Venice. He reasoned that an overly powerful pope, or a Venice that dominated trade routes, would ultimately threaten Naples' own interests. Lorenzo proposed a direct alliance, bypassing the pope entirely, a move that would undermine the very coalition ranged against Florence. Lorenzo, renowned for his intellect, his charisma, and his deep understanding of human nature, personally negotiated with King Ferrante for over 2 months. This was not a formal, impersonal negotiation. It was a battle of wits and personalities. And Lorenzo charmed Ferrante using flattery, strategic concessions, and astute promises of future cooperation. He understood Ferrante's character, knowing when to concede small points to gain larger ones and when to stand firm. He even managed to secure a significant loan from Ferrante, a symbolic gesture of the king's newfound trust and commitment to the nascent peace. The sheer audacity of Lorenzo's presence in Naples, coupled with his diplomatic brilliance, slowly began to wear down Ferrante's initial hostility and suspicion. This direct negotiation with Naples created an immediate and profound schism within the anti-Florentine coalition. The Pope was furious that Ferrante was negotiating directly with Lorenzo, bypassing his authority and undermining his war effort. This rift weakened the alliance and made it impossible for the coalition to present a united front. Where Lorenzo had effectively driven a wedge between his two most powerful adversaries simply by showing up and engaging in direct personal diplomacy. The immediate outcome of Lorenzo's remarkable cunning was a resounding triumph. In March 1480, Lorenzo returned to Florence, having secured a separate peace treaty with Naples. This treaty immediately broke the anti-Florentine coalition, leaving Pope Sixtus IV isolated and exposed. Furious, but strategically outmaneuvered, the Pope was forced to make peace with Florence shortly thereafter, lifting the interdict he had placed upon the city and effectively ending the war. Lorenzo was hailed as a savior, greeted by jubilant crowds upon his return. His personal prestige across Italy soared to new heights, establishing him as a true arbiter of peace and stability in the peninsula. Florence, against all odds, had survived, its stability regained, and its future secured, all thanks to Lorenzo's daring and masterful gamble. Number 8. Lorenzo the Magnificent and the Pazzi Conspiracy Aftermath. Easter Sunday, April 26, 1478, the Florentine Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, a magnificent symbol of Medici power and the city's glory, was packed for high mass. Suddenly, a horrific scene unfolded. The conspirators, led by the rival Pazzi family, and secretly backed by Pope Sixtus IV and the Archbishop Salviati of Pisa, launched a brutal, coordinated assassination attempt on Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici. The target was nothing less than the heart of the Medici dynasty. Giuliano was tragically killed, stabbed multiple times at the altar. Lorenzo, though wounded, managed to fight off his attackers, escaping into the sacristy. Chaos erupted across the city. The Pazzi had expected the Florentine populace, chafing under Medici influence, to rise up and embrace their liberators. They were catastrophically wrong. The setup for this critical moment was one of premeditated violence and a shocking miscalculation by the Pazzi. They believed that by removing the Medici brothers, the Florentine Republic would naturally revert to its earlier form, free from the family's pervasive control. They had underestimated the loyalty of the Florentine people, and more importantly, the speed and ruthlessness of Lorenzo's response. Lorenzo's cunning in the aftermath of the Pazzi conspiracy began with swift, brutal retaliation. Despite his wounds and the shock of his brother's death, Lorenzo acted with chilling efficiency. The conspirators, caught off guard by the public's loyalty to the Medici, were hunted down by angry Florentine citizens. Many were immediately captured and executed on the spot. The Archbishop Salviati, a key orchestrator of the plot, was summarily hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria, the very seat of Florentine government. The streets of Florence literally ran with blood, a gruesome testament to the public's rage and Lorenzo's unyielding grip on power. This rapid, visceral response sent an unmistakable message. An attack on the Medici was an attack on Florence itself. Lorenzo then masterfully engaged in a propaganda war. He framed the attack not as a mere family squabble, but as a treacherous, unholy assault on the city's heart, its spiritual life, and its true leaders. He presented himself as the city's injured savior, a man who had narrowly escaped death to protect Florence from outside manipulators. Public sentiment, already inflamed by the brutality of the assassination attempt, overwhelmingly rallied to his side. The Pazzi, instead of being seen as liberators, were condemned as traitors and enemies of the state. Lorenzo deftly painted the Pope's involvement as a foreign intrusion into Florentine affairs, violating the city's sovereignty and sanctity. Pope Sixtus IV, enraged by the execution of an archbishop and the failure of the conspiracy, responded by excommunicating Lorenzo and placing the entire city of Florence under interdict. This was a severe religious sanction, effectively banning all sacraments, including baptisms, marriages, and burials within the city walls. It was designed to turn the pious Florentine populace against Lorenzo. However, Lorenzo, with astonishing political acumen, cleverly turned this act of religious warfare into another tool for rallying patriotic Florentines. He argued that the Pope's actions were tyrannical, an unwarranted aggression against Florence's freedom, and a clear sign of papal plotting. He framed the Pope as an aggressor, attempting to subjugate Florence through spiritual blackmail. To further solidify his position, Lorenzo sent envoys across Europe, explaining Florence's plight and the Pope's unwarranted aggression. He meticulously detailed the brutality of the Pazzi attack and the unholy nature of the Pope's involvement. He garnered widespread sympathy and support from other rulers who saw the Pope's actions as excessive and a dangerous precedent for papal interference in secular affairs. And kings and princes, weary of papal political overreach, found common cause with Lorenzo, strengthening Florence's diplomatic standing at a time of extreme vulnerability. The immediate outcome of Lorenzo's swift and cunning response was a complete and utter failure for the Pazzi conspiracy. Lorenzo's power, far from being diminished, was dramatically strengthened. The Pazzi family was destroyed, their property confiscated, their name erased from Florentine records. Florence rallied around Lorenzo with fervent loyalty, accepting him as their true leader and protector. The Pope's authority was challenged, and his attempts to undermine Lorenzo backfired, instead creating a powerful wave of anti-papal sentiment in Florence. This situation, though a triumph for Lorenzo, escalated into a brutal war between Florence and the Papal States, setting the stage for Lorenzo's next incredibly bold and cunning maneuver to secure Florence's survival. Number 9. Cosimo the Elder's hidden control of Florence. After his triumphant return from exile in 1434, Cosimo de' Medici, known as Cosimo the Elder, faced a delicate political problem. Florence was nominally a republic with a long-standing tradition of elected officials and civic liberties. While he had just engineered the exile of his rivals and the return of his family to power, openly seizing control as a dictator would have alienated the Florentine people and likely provoked further upheaval. Cosimo understood that true power lay not in overt command, but in subtle, pervasive influence. His goal was to control Florence completely, but to do so while maintaining the illusion of its republican institutions. He sought to be the first citizen rather than an obvious lord. Cosimo's cunning was a masterpiece of behind-the-scenes manipulation woven into the very fabric of Florentine governance. The cornerstone of his system was his control over the city's electoral process. He introduced and refined a system known as the Accoppiatori. This was a small, seemingly benign committee responsible for selecting the names that would go into the electoral bags, or bourse, from which candidates for various offices were drawn. In reality, this committee was secretly controlled by Cosimo and staffed by his most loyal friends and allies. This ensured that only men loyal to him, or those whose interests aligned with his, could ever be drawn for office. He didn't openly choose officials, he controlled the pool from which officials were chosen. This meant that while the citizens believed they were participating in free elections, the outcome was largely predetermined, ensuring a continuous stream of pro-Medici office holders. Beyond elections, Cosimo wielded his immense financial power as a political weapon. He lent vast sums of money not only to powerful Florentine families, but also directly to the Florentine state itself. This created a pervasive web of debt and obligation. Families across the city found themselves beholden to the Medici Bank. Cosimo would provide dowries for their daughters, business opportunities, and crucial financial support for their ventures. In times of crisis, his personal loans to the state were indispensable. This wasn't just charity, it was a deliberate strategy to create a powerful network of dependents. Those in debt to the Medici were unlikely to challenge them politically. They needed Cosimo's goodwill to survive and prosper. Cosimo also shrewdly manipulated the city's taxation system. Florence had a property tax known as the catasto, a system designed to be fair but easily twisted. Cosimo used it to his advantage. His political enemies found themselves facing ruinously high tax assessments, often crippling their businesses and forcing them into financial hardship or even outright exile. Meanwhile, his allies and supporters often enjoyed a lighter tax burden, providing them with a clear financial incentive to remain loyal. While the tax system appeared equitable on the surface, Cosimo subtly controlled its application, ensuring that it served his political ends. His own substantial tax burden was also managed with care, ensuring his wealth remained intact. Finally, Cosimo understood the power of public image and patronage. He funded grand public works, majestic churches, and sponsored countless artists, including figures like Donatello and Brunelleschi. This extensive patronage served multiple purposes. It created jobs, stimulating the Florentine economy. It beautified the city, enhancing its prestige and making it a wonder of Europe. And most importantly, it established Cosimo as a benevolent patron, a generous benefactor who used his wealth for the common good. This diverted public attention from his political machinations and subtly secured his position as the true leader of Florence, a beloved figure who brought prosperity and glory to the city. The immediate outcome of Cosimo's intricate web of control was a profound transformation of Florentine governance. Cosimo became, without holding any official title beyond that of a prominent citizen, the de facto ruler of Florence. He controlled the government through influence, debt, and the subtle manipulation of its republican institutions. The illusion of a republic was maintained, but the reality was a deeply entrenched Medici oligarchy. The family's financial and political supremacy was solidified, laying the groundwork for generations of Medici power in Florence. Cosimo had achieved absolute control while deftly avoiding the appearance of tyranny, a masterful display of political cunning. Number 10. Cosimo the Elder's return from exile and re-establishment of power. The year is 1433. Florence, a bustling, ambitious republic, is gripped by a power struggle between two formidable families, the established Albizzi, who dominate the government, and the rising Medici, led by the immensely wealthy and influential Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo's growing popularity, his vast financial network, and his pervasive influence through his bank and his numerous clients had become an unbearable threat to the Albizzi. They saw only one way to neutralize him. In September 1433, under charges of treason and seeking to subvert the government, Cosimo was arrested and imprisoned in the Palazzo della Signoria, the very seat of Florentine power. He feared poison, a common and effective method of eliminating political rivals in that era. The stakes were life or death. The setup was dire. While Cosimo was a prisoner, ostensibly at the mercy of his enemies, yet, even in his confinement, Cosimo's cunning began to manifest. He understood that wealth was not just for accumulation, but for strategic deployment, even when one's life was on the line. Cosimo's cunning began immediately, from his prison cell. He wasted no time. He deployed his immense wealth to bribe key officials within the Florentine government. He targeted the podesta, the chief magistrate, and the prison warden. The gold, expertly dispersed, ensured that the normal harshness of imprisonment was mitigated. He gained access to food and wine brought in from outside, a crucial measure to avoid poisoned meals that he deeply feared. This small but vital concession bought him time and ensured his survival, allowing him to continue his machinations even from behind bars. He also leveraged his vast network of supporters both inside Florence and among the powerful merchant families and bankers beyond its walls. These were individuals whose livelihoods and interests were intertwined with the Medici Bank, and their loyalty, bought or earned, was invaluable. While Cosimo was imprisoned, his enemies within the Signoria, the ruling council, debated his fate. Many, including the Albizzi, pushed for his execution. However, Cosimo's carefully cultivated network of allies and debtors within the government subtly worked to delay proceedings, sow doubt, and argue for a less extreme punishment. They presented his wealth as a boon to Florence, arguing that his death would harm the city's financial standing. Through these back channels and well-placed bribes, Cosimo successfully negotiated a deal for exile rather than execution. In October 1433, he was banished from Florence, along with his family. He went to Venice, a rival republic, but importantly, a place where he still commanded immense influence. Cosimo was not idle in exile, far from it. He continued to exert his influence, pulling strings and patiently orchestrating his return. His financial power, the very source of his threat to the Albizzi, now became his most potent weapon from afar. He used his bank to subtly cripple Florentine commerce without him. The city, deprived of his vast capital and his extensive trading networks, began to struggle economically. Merchants who relied on Medici loans found themselves in financial distress. The economy suffered, creating discontent among the populace and putting pressure on the Albizzi-dominated government. Meanwhile, in Venice, Cosimo financed exiled Florentine merchants, demonstrating that prosperity could be found outside of Florence, under his patronage. The economic pressure, combined with Cosimo's continued influence through his network of friends who remained in Florence, steadily eroded the Albizzi's power. The Signoria, increasingly swayed by Cosimo's subtly cultivated allies and the growing economic hardship, began to shift. A new Balia, an emergency committee empowered to make constitutional changes, was formed. Crucially, this committee was packed with Cosimo's most loyal supporters, men he had either bought, indebted, or simply inspired loyalty in over years. This body, ostensibly acting in Florence's best interests, engineered Cosimo's return. In October 1434, exactly 1 year after his exile, Cosimo de' Medici returned to Florence. His entry into the city was a triumphal procession celebrated by jubilant crowds who saw him as the bringer of prosperity and stability. The Albizzi and their remaining supporters were in turn exiled, banished from Florence, their power irrevocably broken. The immediate outcome of Cosimo's daring and cunning maneuver was the re-establishment of Medici power in Florence. He was restored to his position of influence, but he wisely avoided the appearance of a dictator. Instead, he operated behind the scenes, using his friends in government to control the city. The Albizzi family was permanently removed from the political stage, their challenge to Medici supremacy decisively crushed. Cosimo had transformed a sentence of death into a strategic triumph, securing his family's ascendancy and laying the foundation for generations of Medici rule in Florence.